joining me for that tonight, and Elizabeth Moutet from the Sunday Telegraph. Craig Capitas, author of, among other things, Bear Hunting with the Politburo. Régis Le Sommier is from Paris Match, and John Vinocourt is from the International Herald Tribune. John, I'll come back to you if I may. We were just talking about the nightmare scenarios that might pan out if the Eurozone crisis gets any worse.
I don't like to do a Greek job, a prophetic job on questions of any kind, because I really don't see that far. But the circumstances are upsetting because there is a palpable weakening in individual European states. Mrs. Merkel's election loss last week, she was criticized by her own party today. Every day, someplace, if you look at Spain, if you look at Italy, if you look at this country, there's news that is troubling. Europe can't get it together. Europe is going to be more and more dependent, with Germany's leaving nuclear power, on Russian energy sources. We haven't done the job, meaning the West entirely, in Syria. We've stood away from dealing with the Syrian issue. The Russians pushed us back in the UN Security Council. And then there's the markets. And what people say, we're going to have a European ratings agency, which is going to rate companies and banks and situations in a manner that pleases us, which is ridiculous and is laughable. And we're going to have a tax, a Tobin tax on investments, which everybody in business at least thinks is silly. What in the hell are people prescribing that are going to get things done in that final way? And I don't see any of it. Right. That's what's scary.
And there is, as you say, a lot of prophesizing going on about this. Craig Capitas was just saying as well, almost everything that can be said about this has been said. Look at the front page today of the Economist, the Greek run, they're calling it. They've got a €20 bill there up in flames. The end of the world, we've said it again and again, and the journalist is almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? You've got the journalists, the markets, and the political situation, the political leaders. It's all going round and round, and there doesn't seem to be any way out right now.
No, I mean, I would pick up on what Craig was saying about the fact that there has never been any political backbone to Europe, and that's the main problem. The main problem is, I remember when I was studying in Sciences Po about 20 years ago, we would have this political histories courses that would tell us that Europe from its start has always been going through from state nation towards empires, towards state nations. And I think that this time around, I mean, we've built this magnificent thing called the European Union, and we've added countries and countries, and we've, piled up. We've never given it any structure, just like the Charlemagne Empire. I mean, we once had maybe something of focus, but we there is the risk that we see in the future, like 10 years down the road, coming back to this nation states, coming back to nation. And I mean, we certainly, I mean, in the global world, and the weight of Europe now is not as big to be able to handle that. But this is what it seems to go, like when you see Greece, when you see also all sorts of, movement developing in each countries, like nationalist movement is back, a number of things like that, are really, these are elements that are that are cutting Europe. That is, and Europe from the start has never been able to find a political coherence.
And Elizabeth Moutet, some of your colleagues at the Telegraph, they think the euro is a terrible idea. It should never have happened. It hasn't done any good at all for Europe. And one of your colleagues yesterday was saying Europe is literally destroying itself now. Do you think it's been one big mistake?
I'm not sure, actually. I mean, there's a strong Eurosceptic line at the Telegraph, and it's part of the nice British political tradition. I do not entirely share this view. I think, first of all, Europe has had an existence before the euro, and even if the euro is modified, I don't see it entirely vanishing. I think it will still remain as a political unity. I mean, we don't realize that 80% of legislation in European countries is already initiated in Brussels and not in their own countries. So in many ways we've gone through convergence in legal ways, in political way, in economic way. If you take an integrated, consolidated Europe, you find that it's 37% of the world GDP. It still is the largest economic bloc in the entire world. So it's got monetary problems. I think more and more people are now saying it's time to cut our losses, we've got to ring-fence Greece, and we've got to cut it out of the euro. But Greece is only 8% of the European economy. So they will be unpleasant losses to take, but they are, it's possible to take those losses.
So you say Greece out and then carry on the rest of us?
And carry on with the rest of them.
Okay. Don't work that way.
I think more and more people are saying exactly that.
I think they are in Brussels for sure this
week.
They
are also in Paris. I mean, they don't say it publicly, but even people who now work with Mr. Hollande are saying
Brussels has the backbone of a chocolate eclair, and it's just...
But it's not Brussels, it's Paris and Berlin.
It's a problem in Brussels, in Paris, in Berlin, in all of these capitals. The Greeks are now saying, for instance, that they want individuals to come in and do up special project bonds to get the economy moving again. No one's going to invest in this. And what these alleged leaders and salons in Brussels, Paris, and Berlin don't realize is the cascade effect of Greece going under. You're right, it's only 8%. There was a form...
You ring-fence it. You ring-fence it.
Fences don't work. You know why? You can crawl over it or dig under it. A fence doesn't work.
But nobody's going to invest in yet more Greek projects. You go to Greece and you find that Greece is full of those wonderful European things. It's got brand new roads, it's got brand new airports. All of this had been paid by the European Union. And it hasn't changed the fundamentals of the Greek economy,
right,
which is that
people
are on the take, that the figures, the books have been cooked for 40 years.
And it's been a false sense
and
of
that
wealth.
14% only of the people pay income tax. And as long as they don't clean up their act, there's no way that Greece should remain. It should not have been admitted into the Eurozone. I have my own questions about whether it should have been admitted into Europe itself.
So what happens when this hits Spain or when it hits Portugal?
Yeah. Spain is an entirely different animal. I mean, it's got a real economy. It's got people who do pay taxes. Therefore, they demonstrate in the streets because it's so difficult to pay them.
So you don't believe that you do not believe that Greece leaving the Eurozone or leaving the euro at the least is not going to create a cascade effect that's going to spill over?
I don't think so. I think Greece is really a different animal from the others. I think what's going to be tough is, how do you have austerity programs at the same time that you have a way of keeping the weaker, the heads of the weaker people above water? That's the main problem.
Right, that's Germany.
But then take up John's
Greece
point
and ignore Spain.
John was saying about the Russian influence here. Well, the Orthodox connection between the Greeks and the Russians has been going on for centuries. And if Greece is made the poor man of Europe, am I perhaps not alone in thinking that the relationship between the Greeks and the Russians would get stronger, that the Russians may at some point start wanting to go in to purchase assets, maybe use some of their warm water ports? Greece is a member of NATO. There are other factors at work here that I don't think you can codify in money. And I do think there'd be a cascade
Let's
effect.
leave the poor old euro aside for the moment then and move on. Opening old wounds now. Aging Serb General Ratko Mladic appeared at his war crimes trial in The Hague this week. He's on trial for 11 counts of war crimes committed nearly 20 years ago in the former Yugoslavia. Mladic is alleged to have organised the worst atrocities on European soil since World War II, namely the Srebrenica massacre and the siege of Sarajevo. Well, his first day in court was dramatic. Insults were traded back and forth between Mladic and the public gallery. Then, in a major blow to victims yesterday, the judge ruled a mistake by the prosecution meant the trial could now be delayed for another 6 months. Here's the judge in the case.
In light of the prosecution's significant disclosure errors, which the Chamber has addressed briefly yesterday, the Chamber hereby informs the parties that it has decided to suspend the start of the presentation of evidence.
Well, news of that suspension was met with resentment in Sarajevo and in the wartime Bosnian Serb stronghold of Pale.
I think it's all just a farce. I feel especially sorry for those mothers from Srebrenica whom Mladic ignores and taunts. For me, he's just a criminal who should be sentenced as soon as possible for what he has done.
The Hague Tribunal has lost its fight already. It's a fake tribunal which only creates misery for the people in Bosnia.
Regis, it was a pretty unpleasant first day in court. Mladic came in doing a throat-slitting gesture towards one of the victim's family. He went on to cheer himself and put his thumbs up. This kind of thing, you think, should it really be televised? Should be people be watching
I don't know about whether this should be televised or not, but I think that the trial of Ratko Mladic come at a time where it's the 20th anniversary of the war over there. And the other day, there was a reunion of photographers and photojournalists that covered the Bosnian War. I mean, that's not my generation. These are people that are a little older, and they've put out a book. And I was looking at the pictures, and I realized, and somehow we've forgotten about that, how bloody that war was, and how, of course, civil war is always bloody because, as Marot would say, you know the people you're killing. And this time, from the beginning, the decomposition of former Yugoslavia, and the Serbs, going after the Bosnians, and the Croats going after the Croats first, and then all these different ethnical and religious groups going at each other. It was pretty bloody. It was pretty, and I think what's bad with the fact that with this delay is that Ratko Mladic being prosecuted and sentenced could put actually an end to that, because these countries have been able to rise again. They've been able to pull themselves together. Now they're looking towards the future, and that would have been a closing time. And unfortunately, it's going to be delayed.
All things considered, and taking scale into consideration, could you imagine the Nuremberg trials being put off for 6 months because a prosecutor had made an error? This is an ugly business, and I think at a bad time for Europe, a really bad time for Europe, this looks like bumbling. This looks like just not being able to get it together. And I think there are a whole bunch of kids who are 10 and 12 years old at home who would have seen this on television, and their mothers or fathers or uncles or aunts would have said, this happened an hour and a half from where we went to the beach last summer, and this is what happens when things really get ugly in life. This is a very, very, very frightening moment in the sense that things seem to be slipping out of hand. You can't bring a monster to trial because there's been an error in the preparation of the case. Who's in charge? It's a who's in charge moment. What's going on? Let's get a grip on this.
He'll probably pass away like Milosevic did before any verdict is given.
He's not that old.
Well, he's
70, but he's had 2 heart attacks and a stroke, or 2 strokes and a heart attack.
Yeah, 3 or 4 heart attacks and strokes.
And these trials have been criticised, haven't they, for going on far too long? What do you think about that?
For any of us who were there, you look at this and you just shake your head. This is the man who is the poster boy for ethnic cleansing.
Yes.
And it's probably a good thing that I'm not a judge at that tribunal, because I would have a change of venue. I think we move it to Srebrenica or Sarajevo, and we hold it on top of the graves. And you broadcast it globally. You cut into CNN and everything, and you say, "Hey, world, look at this." John's point about the Nuremberg trials, I think really hits home. But how many kids today know what the Nuremberg trials were? This was a horror show down there of.
Well, how many kids know about Bosnia?
Bosnia, I mean, you're looking probably over 8,000 people slaughtered. This was a horror show of unimaginable proportions. And this fellow, Ratko, is a thug. He is a mass murderer, allegedly. Right, just to keep the, I want to keep the War Crimes Tribunal, happy with it. Allegedly.
Let's leave that story where it is for now. Then let's move on to our last and bit of a more positive note to end this week. The 65th Cannes Film Festival is underway in the south of France. None of us were invited, I noticed. 22 films are in the running to win the coveted Palme d'Or. Well, it was the British comedian Sacha Baron Cohen who stole the show by turning up dressed as a Bog standard Arab dictator, complete with camel. This is all for his new film, Dictator. There he is, which has already been barred in Tajikistan, would you believe? Officials say the film is incompatible with the country's values. Well, the festival opens with Wes Anderson's Moonrise Kingdom, a tale of love at the difficult age of 12. Day 2 took a completely different turn with the film Paradise Love, which is about African sex trafficking. So they're just two of the films that have got going at the beginning of the festival. Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, I was horrified to read that in 65 years, only one female film director has won the Palme d'Or.
That was Jane Campion with a piano,
Campion.
I think 84. Well, as you know, French women directors have sent a letter to the festival saying that there was not a single film made by a woman selected this year for the Palme d'Or, and that it really showed entrenched misogyny among the jury and among the powers that be at the Cannes Film Festival. And I think even though there has been a great wave of protest of people who do not want to get on the bad side of the Cannes people, I think actually they have a point. One point that has been made is that until fairly recently there were not many women directors. You've got to basically hold together a fractious crew of possibly 100, 200 people.
And the egos.
From the egos of the stars and the fractiousness of the unions, because that's a heavily unionized business. So weak women were not supposed to be able to, but we've seen in the past that women could do. Somebody like Catherine Bigelow ought to have been invited, and certainly that's the letter of these women directors said that they're only interested in depth in women where it's depth of cleavage, and I think that was a good line, and it was unfortunately true. And I say this as somebody who has nothing against having generously sort of uncovered starlets on the beach, because that's also part of Cannes, which I covered several years.
Is part of it, isn't it? We have to say we all like to look at the dresses.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is giving a much needed boost to the French film industry, though, isn't it?
What, Cannes?
Yes.
Yeah, and to France in general. I mean, it
great.
gives a very good idea.
It's wonderful.
Very
Fluff
good
and
image
circumstance. Wonderful.
Yeah. It's wonderful.
Anyone got any tips who's going to win this year?
I have no idea.
Oh, after that, Anne's never going to be invited down there now.
Oh, yeah.
You outraged them, dear.
Oh, no, there are ways. It's a wonderful place. I used to cover it in the 90s, and it is, at the end of the day, it is about what's best about the movies. At the same time, you've got all the hoopla, and you've got all the tinsel, and you've also got some fantastic, it's exhausting.
Just before we go, what was a big highlight for you? Can you think of any big moments, anyone you met? Any glamorous tales to tell?
I've met all sorts of glamorous
interviews. Did you meet George
interviews.
Clooney or anyone
I
like
know.
that?
I interviewed Harrison Ford.
Oh, Harrison
and
Ford.
I translated.
I had dinner with
I translated
Iron Man.
for Robert Redford, which was great fun. I helped translate for Robert Redford during a press conference, so that was fun.
Wonderful.
And no, I remember an Argentinian movie called El Sur, the South, which was about. It's a sort of magic realism movie made about the dictatorship and the people who were sent deported to the South, which is, of course, were close to the South Pole in Argentina, and it was magical. It was the music of Piazzolla. It was a great movie, and the movie got a fantastic reception, and the crew had a party afterwards, and they did not know what was happening to them, because suddenly the entire
Just propels them on the world stage.
It was great. It was wonderful. It's one of my best memories of the festival.
Good stuff. Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, Craig Capitas, Regis Le Sommier, and John Vinokur. Many thanks indeed to you all for joining us. Thanks to you for watching. This has been The World This Week. I'm Laura Baines. François back with you next week. Stay tuned.